If you step back and just look at the sheer scale of the cybersecurity industry today, you run into this massive, almost comical paradox that just completely defies common sense.
Oh, absolutely. It's really something else when you look at the numbers.
Right. Because right now, at this exact moment, we have the most advanced next-generation firewalls, the most intricate zero-trust architectures, and these mathematically complex quantum-resistant encryption protocols.
The best in all of human history, yeah. I mean, it is genuinely a technological golden age for defense.
It really is.
The sheer computational processing power that organizations dedicate to keeping their systems safe is just staggering. We are using artificial intelligence to analyze network traffic patterns in, like, microseconds.
Microseconds.
Yeah.
And yet, if you look at the raw data, corporate data breaches are not just continuing, they're actively accelerating.
Yeah, they're becoming more frequent, and the fallout is vastly more catastrophic.
Exactly. And here is the paradox for you. The most expensive, devastating breaches in recent memory, they weren't caused by some, brilliant state-sponsored malware engineered by a dozen PhDs in a subterranean bunker somewhere.
Right, it's never the movie scenario.
Never. They were caused by tired, overworked employees bypassing annoying, multi-step authentication processes just to get their jobs done. Welcome to Security Thursday, Leadership in Digital Sovereignty. This is not just about security controls or frameworks. It's about responsibility, clarity, and the decisions that shape how secure an organization really is.
Because, honestly, the corporate world has become entirely obsessed with the blinking lights.
The blinking lights, yeah.
The dashboards, the compliance acronyms, the glossy vendor brochures that promise this military-grade, AI-driven invincibility.
It's all marketing at a certain point.
It is. They're looking at the server racks, but the perimeter has fundamentally changed. It no longer sits in a data center. It sits inside the human mind and the daily high-pressure decisions of the workforce.
And that is exactly the mission for this deep dive. We are talking directly to you, the listener.
Right, because this applies to everyone.
Yeah, whether you are an executive staring at an incomprehensible risk matrix, or an IT director just trying to keep the lights on without grinding the business to a halt, or just someone insanely curious about why massive digital systems collapse.
We are going to look past the software today.
Exactly. We're looking at the human architecture running the show. We're going to analyze the core philosophy that security is a continuous cultural indicator.
It's not an IT procurement task. I mean, you can't just buy it.
Right. It is a behavioral reality.
Yeah.
And the sources we are pulling from today, they ground this entire conversation in a vital German concept, which is Gestalten statt Verwalten.
Shaping instead of administering. That is such a profound distinction.
It really is. Can you break that down a bit?
Sure. It is the crucial difference between actively designing a living culture of safety and just, passively managing a dead checklist of rules.
A dead checklist.
Because organizations fundamentally misunderstand security when they treat it as a commodity. They view it as a line item on a capital expenditure budget.
Oh, totally. Let's explore that, because this is where we run into what the sources actually call the security paradox. There's this pervasive illusion of purchased security.
Right, the idea that money equals safety.
Exactly. So an executive team secures, let's say, a $10 million budget. They go out into the market and they buy a massive unified threat management system, behavioral analytics, data loss prevention software. The works.
They buy the entire catalog.
Right. And they assume that by paying that massive invoice, they have transferred the risk away from themselves and onto the software.
Yeah, they confuse a tool with a control.
Mm-hmm.
And that distinction is basically the bedrock of everything we are discussing today.
Tool versus control. Let's dig into that.
Well, a tool is just an object with potential. It is the software code, the heuristic engine, the physical hardware.
Right.
A control, however, is the systemic integration of that tool into human behavior and leadership clarity. A tool without a control is just a very expensive, highly sophisticated decoration.
A very expensive decoration. I like that.
And ironically, the more sophisticated the tool, the more it can actually weaponize human psychology against the organization.
Wait, weaponize because of cognitive offloading, right?
Exactly. As a company spends more and more money on these highly automated tools, the actual sense of personal responsibility among the employees actively shrinks.
That's like the bystander effect, right?
Yeah.
But applied to enterprise risk.
That's exactly what it is.
Right.
When the security apparatus is so massive and so visible, when there's a multi-million-dollar AI scanning every single email, Every person in the organization subconsciously assumes that someone else or something else is handling the threat.
Right. They think, oh, the algorithm will catch the phishing link,
Mhm.
or the firewall will block the malicious download. I don't need to worry about it.
Precisely. They stop paying attention.
This reminds me of one of my favorite visuals from the material to explain this disconnect. Picture a company that decides they need absolute, undeniable physical security for their main server room.
Right, the crown jewels of the company.
Right. So they bring in the engineers, they pour concrete, and they install an impenetrable solid steel biometric vault door.
Oh, yeah, the $10 million door.
Exactly. It has retinal scanners, weight sensors, multi-factor keypads. It's a total marvel of engineering that cost them $10 million.
Flawless on paper.
Completely flawless. But a week after it's installed, you walk down the hallway and you see that this impenetrable steel door has been propped wide open with a $5 wooden wedge.
It happens all the time.
And why? Because the system administrators who have to go in and out of that room carrying heavy server blades 50 times a day, they find the 30-second retinal scan and the double-door airlock to be, too slow.
It creates massive operational friction for them.
Right. So they bypass it. The tool is perfect, but the control does not exist.
Right. And in that exact moment, with the door propped open by a piece of wood, that environment is actually significantly more dangerous than if they had just installed a standard, cheap wooden door with a brass padlock.
Hold on. I have to challenge that logic. I don't buy that.
You don't buy it.
No. If I have a chief information security officer, a CISO, and I just went to the board, bled my political capital dry to secure that $10 million budget, and bought the absolute best-in-class defense system,
Yeah.
my organization is objectively safer.
Is it, though?
Yes.
Yeah.
The underlying technology is superior. You can't tell me a massive technological investment is worthless or actually makes things worse just because human beings are occasionally lazy.
Right.
We have deep packet inspection now, not a chain link fence.
Okay, I hear you, but I am not saying the tool itself lacks capability.
Okay.
I am saying that in the context of human behavior and organizational dynamics, that tool creates a massive blind spot. Think about the psychology of the board of directors in your scenario.
Right. They sign the check.
They signed the $10 million check. And because they paid for invincibility, they sleep soundly at night, genuinely believing that the vault is impenetrable.
So the tool creates an illusion of safety.
Exactly. And that illusion breeds deep complacency.
So they basically stop looking for threats.
Precisely. If they only had a cheap wooden door, the executives would know they were vulnerable. They would act with caution.
Right. They might post a physical guard or something.
Yeah, or they would constantly remind employees to be vigilant. The risk would be front of mind. But the shiny new tool offloads that anxiety.
Wow. Okay. I see where you're going.
The board thinks the risk is mitigated, the employees find the tool annoying and bypass it, and the attacker walks right through the propped open door.
While the multi-million-dollar alarms remain completely silent.
Because they were never properly integrated into the workflow.
That makes a lot of sense because human beings we're evolutionarily wired to kind of the path of least resistance. We want to conserve energy.
It's biology. You can't fight it with software.
Right. If a security protocol slows down my ability to do my job, and I don't understand why the protocol exists, I will find a workaround. I just will.
And this is where leadership usually makes their second catastrophic mistake.
Oh, do tell.
Well, when the shiny tools inevitably fail, when the CISO realizes the $10 million door is propped open, they rarely look in the mirror and ask, how did we fail to design a workable control?
Right, they blame the users.
Exactly. And instead of fixing the workflow, they pivot to the next flawed defense mechanism, which is bureaucracy.
Ah, bureaucracy. They attempt to legislate security.
They write a 200-page policy manual. They confuse security, which is a dynamic, organic state of organizational maturity, with control, which is just a rigid state of restriction.
So they assume that if they can just force everyone to sign a dense compliance document, they have magically reestablished safety.
Exactly. Which is a total fallacy.
Because control in this bureaucratic sense is a cheap, incredibly dangerous substitute for clarity.
Right.
When you force rigid controls onto users without providing the rationale, you don't get security. You get compliant theater.
Compliance theater, that is the perfect term for it.
Yeah, the organization looks perfectly secure on an external auditor spreadsheet. Every ISO 27001 box is completely ticked.
But functionally, operationally.
The organization is completely compromised because the workforce is quietly working around the rules just to survive their workday.
Yeah. People just want to go home at 5 p.m.
Let's ground this in something every single person listening to this has experienced. The dreaded 90-day password rotation.
The quintessential example of compliance theater. Yes, let's talk about it.
Here is the visceral reality of that policy. Okay, it's Tuesday morning. You have a massive career-defining meeting in 15 minutes with the executive team.
Your cortisol is already spiking just thinking about it.
Right. You're stressed. You go to log into your laptop to pull up your presentation, and boom, the screen locks.
The worst timing possible.
Always. And it says, your password has expired. You must choose a new password containing an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, a number, and a special character. And you cannot use any of your last 10 passwords.
Now, on paper, that control satisfies the security algorithm perfectly. It mathematically limits the window of time an attacker has to exploit a stolen credential.
But what does the human being sitting at that desk actually do?
They panic.
Right. They are stressed. They do not have the mental bandwidth or the time to invent and memorize a cryptographically secure sequence of random characters.
No one does in that moment.
So they take their old password, summer 2025, and they change it to autumn 2025.
Classic. Or if the system is incredibly strict and blocks sequential words, they just mash the keyboard in a rage.
Exactly. They generate a random string of nonsense and immediately write it down on a neon pink sticky note that they slap directly onto their monitor.
And just like that, the strict bureaucratic control has completely destroyed actual security.
Because the rule completely ignored the operational reality and the psychological state of the user.
It treated the human as a machine that processes inputs, rather than an organism that experiences stress.
But wait, I have to push back again here.
Go for it.
Because that argument assumes people behave rationally, which they don't. Humans are messy. They are distracted, and frankly, they are fundamentally lazy with technology.
True, we are lazy.
Right, so if we don't force them into a tight box with strict, unbending rules, the entire network is going to be compromised by lunch. Isn't this idea of relying on clarity and understanding over hard rules just, I don't know, pure idealism?
You think it's just wishful thinking?
Yeah. If we don't force the 90-day rotation, they'll use password 123 for a decade.
It sounds like idealism until you examine how those strict, unbending boxes actively aid attackers during a crisis. Let's look at the ultimate bureaucratic box, okay? The RCI chart.
Responsible, accountable, consulted, informed.
Right. In a highly bureaucratic organization, this chart dictates exactly who can make what decision, under what circumstances. It is explicitly designed to prevent chaos and ensure proper oversight.
Sure, if you have terabytes of sensitive data, you don't want a junior employee making unilateral decisions about network architecture. You need a chain of command.
But in practice, especially under threat conditions, a perfect RCI chart is often just an elaborate bureaucratic alibi designed to protect middle management from personal liability.
Wow, an elaborate alibi.
Hear me out. Imagine a junior security operations center analyst, the person actively monitoring the network traffic. It is 3:00 a.m. on a Sunday.
Oh no, always 3:00 a.m.
Always. They spot a massive, catastrophic data breach in progress. They see terabytes of customer data being actively exfiltrated to an external IP address.
The absolute nightmare scenario. The heart rate spikes.
Oh, they are terrified. But
Yeah.
the analyst sees it. They understand the technical mechanism of the attack. They know exactly how to sever the external connection, kill the reverse shell, and stop the bleeding immediately.
So they can fix it right then and there.
Yes. But the 200-page policy manual, the strict box you just defended, mandates that severing any external client-facing connection requires the digital signature of a vice president or director.
And it's 3:00 a.m. The director is asleep.
The analyst tries to call, it goes to voicemail, they try again, nothing. Now, the analyst does not have the delegated authority to act.
Oh, this is bad.
If they pull the plug on their own, and it turns out to be a false positive that disrupts a legitimate overnight backup, they are terrified of being fired for violating the strict policy.
So what do?
They wait. They sit in their chair and watch the data leave the network while they wait for the sun to come up and the director to check their phone.
That is agonizing.
In cybersecurity, delay equals risk. The bureaucratic control didn't stop the chaos. It paralyzed the defender and provided the attacker with the exact dwell time they needed to complete the exfiltration.
The rule itself became the vulnerability.
Exactly. The strict rule helped the attacker.
That is a chilling example.
Yeah.
The human was perfectly capable of stopping the threat. But the bureaucracy acted as a straitjacket.
Right.
So if tools aren't a silver bullet, And rigid rules actually backfire under pressure? Where does an organization actually find its defense?
This brings us to the architecture of defense, specifically what the sources refer to as the 4 pillars of security controls.
Okay, lay them out for me.
We have organizational, technological, physical, and personnel controls. They are deeply interdependent.
Interdependent, like a table with 4 legs.
Exactly. You can have the best technology, the strongest physical buildings, and the most logical organizational charts, but if the personnel pillar cracks, the whole roof caves in.
So it all comes back to the humans.
We need to focus heavily on that personnel pillar. Specifically, we need to completely redefine psychological safety.
Let's unpack this carefully because psychological safety is a loaded term.
It gets misused a lot.
Yeah, in a lot of corporate environments, it sounds like an HR buzzword. It sounds like trust falls, off-site retreats, and, making sure everyone's feelings are validated.
Right, hugging it out.
Exactly. But the sources we are analyzing define it as a hard, non-negotiable security control.
It is the most critical security control you have. Because the greatest vulnerability in any organization is not a zero-day software exploit. It is silence.
Silence.
Under operational stress, under tight deadlines, and facing sheer exhaustion, human beings make mistakes. It is a biological inevitability.
We aren't robots.
Right. What dictates a company's survival is not whether a mistake happens. It is what happens in the 60 seconds after the mistake is made.
The 60 seconds after. Let's paint that picture using the GitHub root credential leak scenario from the material.
Well, this is a perfect example.
We have a mid-level developer. It is 11:000 p.m. on a Thursday. They are exhausted, running on fumes, drinking their 4th coffee, desperately trying to push a critical code update to the pipeline before a Friday morning deadline.
We've all been there.
In their blurred, tired state, they accidentally hard code an AWS admin key, which is basically the master key to the company's entire cloud infrastructure, directly into a public GitHub repository.
A monumental, potentially extinction-level error.
Right. Now, 5 minutes later, the developer is reviewing the commit and realizes what they've done. The adrenaline hits the bloodstream, the panic sets in.
Cold sweat time.
Yes. If this developer works in a toxic, fear-based culture, a place where the CTO regularly screams over minor infractions, where people are publicly humiliated in Slack channels, or where the immediate consequence for an error is termination, what do they do in that moment?
They fall completely silent. Survival instinct takes over. They panic. They desperately try to quietly delete the commit. They try to rewrite the Git version history, and they just sit at their desk in a cold sweat, praying to God that no one noticed.
But in the modern threat landscape, someone always notices.
Always. Automated ransomware bots scrape those public repositories 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They find the exposed key in milliseconds.
Millisecond.
But because the developer stayed silent out of fear, the internal security team has absolutely no idea the key was exposed. They are completely blind.
Wow.
The attackers now have the dwell time they need to enter the network, map the cloud architecture, escalate privileges, and encrypt everything. The silence provided the cover.
Whereas in a mature learning culture, a culture with actual psychological safety, what happens in those 60 seconds?
The developer realizes the mistake. The adrenaline still hits, they still feel terrible, but instead of hiding it, they immediately pick up the phone.
They just call it in.
They call the security lead at 11:05 p.m. and say, "I messed up, I was exhausted, and I exposed the root key 5 minutes ago." The security team instantly revokes and rolls the keys. The breach is prevented entirely.
Just like that.
The fear-based culture bred the silence that allowed a dormant risk to compound into a disaster. Psychological safety is the mechanism that ensures the alarm gets pulled.
I hear that, but I'm going to push back again here because I think this ignores a massive operational reality.
Okay, let's hear it.
If an employee leaves the digital vault door wide open, exposes the master keys, and jeopardizes the livelihoods of hundreds of employees, and we just say, "Thank you for sharing, let's have a cup of tea."
That's not what I'm saying.
But if there are no severe consequences for catastrophic failure, are we just incentivizing gross negligence and sloppiness? We can't run a multi-million-dollar business on good vibes. There has to be accountability.
That is the most common and frankly most dangerous misunderstanding of what psychological safety actually is. Psychological safety is not the absence of accountability.
It's not.
No. It is the absence of interpersonal fear.
Walk me through how those are different in practice, because they sound very similar.
True accountability means the employee takes ownership of the failure and takes active responsibility for the fix. That requires immense courage and transparency. But it is entirely impossible for an employee to take responsibility if they're hiding the error just to save their job. If the culture demands absolute perfection, people will not become perfect. They will simply become highly skilled at hiding their imperfections.
Huh. That is a great point.
You don't give the developer a hug and ignore the mistake. You say, "Thank you for reporting this immediately. You saved the company. Now you are going to sit down with the security architecture team. We are going to figure out how our automated pre-commit hooks failed to catch this string. And you're going to help rewrite the deployment pipeline so this specific human error is mathematically impossible to repeat."
So psychological safety is actually the structural prerequisite for genuine accountability.
Yeah.
Without it, you just have a culture of cover-ups and scapegoats.
Precisely. And this leads us to the ultimate test of that culture. Because it is incredibly easy to preach about security, transparency, and safety when the seas are calm.
Oh, absolutely.
It's easy to have these values written on a nice glass plaque in the lobby. But security doesn't live on a whiteboard. It revealed its true face under extreme pressure, severe time constraints, and agonizing goal conflicts.
This is the crucible. How does leadership behave when revenue and security violently collide?
This is where we see what an organization actually values. If a leader overrides an established security policy to secure a short-term financial target, they normalize an exception.
And human psychology dictates that an exception normalized once becomes the new, invisible rule for the entire organization.
Exactly.
Let's bring in a highly specific scenario from the sources. They call it the Friday 4:00 p.m. scenario.
The crucible for any executive.
It really is. So it is 4:00 p.m. on a Friday. The company is launching a $2 million e-commerce platform update at 5:00 p.m. It is the biggest launch of the entire year.
High stakes.
Very high stakes. The CEO has personally promised the board of directors and the shareholders that this new checkout flow will generate a 20% revenue bump this quarter. The marketing dollars are already spent, the press releases are chewed up, the social media campaign goes live in exactly 1 hour.
The pressure in that room is suffocating. Careers are riding on this single hour.
Exactly. But at 4:05 p.m., the external marketing vendor calls the CEO in an absolute panic. They report a critical tracking bug in the live environment. The analytics script is breaking the checkout flow.
Oh, disaster.
If they don't fix it right now, the launch is blind, they can't track conversions, and the whole multi-million-dollar campaign is a waste. But to fix it, the vendor demands unrestricted administrative root access directly to the live production database for the entire weekend so their engineers can hotfix the code.
Now, the organization has a strict, heavily documented policy signed by that same CEO that any external root access request requires a mandatory 48-hour security review.
To configure least privilege access and set up monitoring right.
Right, but they don't have 48 hours, they have 55 minutes.
Now, in theory, the textbook answer is to hold the line and deny the access. But what happens in reality?
Reality is much messier.
If the IT director walks into the CEO's office and tells them they need to delay a $2 million highly publicized launch for a 48-hour security review over a marketing tracker, the CEO is going to force the launch.
You think so?
The business will grind to a halt. You cannot stop the engine of commerce for a bureaucratic protocol when the shareholders are watching.
If the CEO overrides the policy and grants that unrestricted access to save the launch, the security culture of that entire organization dies in that exact precise second.
Guys, just from one single exception on a Friday afternoon, isn't that a bit dramatic?
No, it is the psychological reality of leadership. Because the CEO has just broadcasted a message far louder and far more potent than any policy document or all-hands speech ever could.
What message?
By overriding the rule to hit a revenue target, they have explicitly communicated to the entire staff that security is merely a suggestion and that when push comes to shove, revenue always trumps safety.
Wow.
The system is structurally compromised from the top down. The next time a junior engineer spots a vulnerability before a major deadline, they won't report it.
Because they'll remember Friday at 4:00 p.m.
Exactly. They will remember and they will stay silent because they know leadership doesn't actually care about security when it costs money.
That is a terrifying ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
But how does a leader actually navigate that moment? Because the pressure, the fear of failure, the uncertainty in that 4:05 p.m. meeting, it triggers a massive biological response. It floods the executive system with cortisol.
This is the emotional underbelly of cybersecurity that we rarely talk about. We talk about firewalls, but we don't talk about cortisol.
Biology plays a huge part.
Cortisol increases your physical reaction time, but it absolutely plummets your reflection time. You get severe cognitive tunnel vision. You are no longer thinking about systemic risk. You just want the immediate pain and the pressure of the vendor screaming at you to stop.
Which leads to what the sources call blind actionism.
Yes. Blind actionism is the illusion of leadership through rapid, reckless motion. Under intense stress, doing anything, feels fundamentally better than sitting with the ambiguity of the threat.
Granting the vendor access feels like decisive, strong leadership. It solves the immediate pain. It gets the launch out the door.
So how do you fight your own biology? How does an IT director or CSO combat the cortisol in that room and stop the CEO from making a fatal error?
Right, because just saying no doesn't work.
To combat blind actionism, leaders must deploy a framework the sources call the consequences compass. Its primary function is to artificially front-load friction into the decision-making process.
Front-load friction. I like that.
It forces the decision maker to take a deliberate, structured pause to map out 4 specific questions, anchoring heavily on the 4th and most vital question. What is the absolute worst-case scenario?
You are forcing them to make the implicit risk explicit.
Exactly. If we apply the compass to the Friday 4:00 p.m. scenario, the IT director doesn't just walk in and say, the 200-page policy says no, we can't do it.
Because that just makes them look like an obstructionist bureaucrat.
Right. Instead, they use the compass. They explicitly state out loud in the room with the CEO, I understand the launch is critical, but the absolute worst-case scenario of granting this unrestricted, unmonitored root access to a third-party vendor is that the vendor gets compromised this weekend. Hackers pivot through our open tunnel, they deploy ransomware, they encrypt our entire customer database, and they extort us for $20 million, which will bankrupt the company and put us all in a congressional hearing.
Wow. Once you put that specific, vivid nightmare into the air, the cognitive math of the room completely alters.
It shatters the tunnel vision. Suddenly, the idea of taking 10 minutes to properly configure a time-bound, auto-expiring access role, or even delaying the launch by an hour to do it safely, doesn't look like annoying IT red tape anymore.
It looks like the only rational choice a sane adult would make to protect the enterprise.
Exactly.
But let's be honest, that breaks down under pressure, doesn't it?
How so?
A 3-minute philosophical pause using a compass framework. When the board is breathing down your neck, the pressure to move fast is literally an addiction. It provides a dopamine hit. Giving the vendor the keys makes the screaming stop, the launch happens, and everyone goes to happy hour. It feels good in the moment.
You are absolutely right about the dopamine hit, and that is exactly why leadership requires discipline. Leaders must understand the concept of security debt.
Security debt, like technical debt.
Yes, but with worse consequences. Taking a pragmatic shortcut today, bypassing the 48-hour review to hit the 5:00 p.m. deadline, is taking out a massive, uncollateralized loan against the organization's future.
And what's the interest rate on that loan?
The interest rate is fatal. You might hit your launch deadline today. The dopamine hits. The CEO gets their bonus. But 3 months from now, that forgotten, unmonitored vendor access, that invisible exception you normalized, is the back door that a ransomware syndicate uses to destroy the enterprise.
So it's a ticking time bomb.
A sovereign leader must be willing to trade short-term social friction, the anger of the marketing team, the deep annoyance of the CEO for the long-term survival of the business.
That concept of a sovereign leader transitions us perfectly into our next major theme, digital sovereignty, specifically in the context of artificial intelligence and web fraud prevention.
This is where all these concepts of responsibility face their ultimate technological test.
It is the frontier where human psychology and algorithmic power collide. Now, usually when we hear the term digital sovereignty in the news, we think of macro geopolitics, right?
Yeah, international treaties, that sort of thing.
We think of data localization laws, GDPR, debates over whether physical servers are located in a data center in Frankfurt or Virginia.
But the sources here redefine sovereignty for the organizational leader. In this context, digital sovereignty is not about physical geography, it is about cognitive geography.
Cognitive geography. That is an amazing phrase.
It is about maintaining your absolute cognitive authority and your moral responsibility over your digital systems, especially as we rush headlong into the age of artificial intelligence.
Here is where it gets incredibly fascinating. As organizations network these massive data pools together, we're talking SIEMs, security information and event management systems, intrusion detection, automated bot management, and they start driving them with AI. a brand new psychological threat emerges.
The threat of cognitive convenience.
Yes, it is the ultimate evolution of the bystander effect we discussed earlier with the $10 million door.
The human brain wants to conserve energy. When a highly complex, beautifully designed AI dashboard flashes a reassuring green light and says a transaction is safe, the overwhelming temptation is to surrender to it.
To blindly trust the machine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because questioning the machine takes immense cognitive effort. If the AI analyzed 1 million data points to say, approved, who am I to disagree?
But you cannot delegate systemic responsibility to an algorithm. Let's look at the industrialized reality of digital deception right now, specifically web fraud prevention. Hackers aren't breaking down the back door with brute force password attacks as much anymore.
It's too slow.
Right. They are walking right through the front door using synthetic identities, automated click fraud, and massive coordinated botnets. To fight this, companies use AI systems that monitor behavioral biometrics.
Yes, the AI is no longer just looking at the password. It is analyzing the microsecond flight time between a user's keystrokes.
It's mind-blowing.
It is measuring the specific gyroscopic angle they're holding their mobile device, the pressure of their finger on the glass, the subtle, erratic imperfections of human interaction. It compares that to millions of known bot patterns.
But here is where I have to play devil's advocate again.
Bring it on.
If the AI is monitoring keystroke flight time and gyroscopic device angles, it is mathematically superior to human perception. It can process millions of log files and cross-reference behavioral anomalies in a microsecond.
It can.
A human analyst literally cannot do that. Shouldn't we inherently trust the machine over the flawed, slow human? Why shouldn't we surrender our sovereignty if the AI is just objectively better at the math?
This raises the hardest truth of modern technological leadership. You can delegate a computational task to an AI. You absolutely cannot delegate systemic responsibility.
Explain the difference. What does that actually look like?
Let's use the analogy of a commercial airplane autopilot. Modern airliners practically fly themselves 90% of the time. The autopilot is a mathematical marvel. It optimizes fuel efficiency, it maintains altitude perfectly, it adjusts for wind shear faster than a human could.
It's brilliant.
It is a fantastic tool for delegating a computational task. But when that airplane flies into a severe, unpredictable supercell thunderstorm and the external pitot tubes freeze over, the autopilot starts receiving corrupted, contradictory data.
It gets confused.
It might try to pitch the nose of the plane up to a dangerous angle to correct a false altitude reading, risking an aerodynamic stall. If the human pilot has surrendered their cognitive authority, if their hands are in their lap, their mind is elsewhere, and they blindly trust the green light on the dashboard, the plane crashes.
Because they weren't paying attention.
Digital sovereignty means the pilot keeps their hands near the yoke. They use the autopilot to handle the massive computational load, but they retain the situational awareness and the ultimate authority to click the autopilot off and fly manually the second the data stops making sense.
Because if the AI approves a synthetic identity that turns out to be a ransomware cartel, and you lose millions of customer records, you can't fire the algorithm. The algorithm doesn't go to jail.
Exactly. When the government regulators come knocking, when the class action lawsuits are filed, or when the shareholders are screaming, the CEO still goes to the congressional hearing. The human bears the moral, legal, and financial liability.
Sovereignty is refusing to let cognitive convenience separate you from your responsibility.
Yeah.
You must understand the logic of the systems you deploy.
Yes.
So if we pull back and look at the whole picture we've painted, the illusion of the tools, the danger of blind bureaucracy, the absolute necessity of psychological safety, navigating the crucible of goal conflicts, and maintaining sovereignty over AI, how does a leader actually architect all of this into a functional organization?
This brings us to the structural solution, valuing the silence and unified threat management.
Architecture is the ultimate test of leadership maturity. The problem most organizations face today isn't a lack of tools. It is an overwhelming overabundance of fragmented, disconnected tools.
Oh, absolutely. They buy a best-in-class firewall from vendor A, a shiny intrusion detection system from vendor B, an email filter from vendor C, and endpoint protection from vendor D.
And none of those systems naturally talk to each other.
Fragmented security tools create massive, invisible blind spots that no single team can own. When an advanced, persistent threat enters the network, it touches multiple systems.
It leaves a trail.
Like it comes in through an email, moves to an endpoint, attempts to escalate privileges, and then tries to exfiltrate data through the firewall. But if those systems are disconnected, it takes a human analyst hours, sometimes days, to manually pull the logs from 4 different dashboards, correlate the data, and realize a coordinated attack is happening.
And as we established with the 3.0 AM ASCII chart example, a 20-minute delay in a fragmented architecture is a fatal flaw. The attackers are moving at machine speed.
Imagine an air traffic control tower at a major international airport. You have a United Airlines heavy jet on approach and a Delta jet taking off. But the radar screen tracking the United flight is completely disconnected from the radar screen tracking the Delta flight.
That sounds absolutely terrifying.
It is a recipe for disaster. The human controllers have to print out the coordinates on paper, run across the room, and hand them to each other to figure out if the planes are on a collision course.
And that is exactly what siloed IT systems do to data packets. They guarantee a collision.
So the obvious solution is Unified Threat Management, or UTM. Bringing all of those fragmented logs, all of that AI telemetry, under one visible, correlated umbrella.
But if UTM is so logically obvious, why doesn't everyone just do it? Why do we still have fragmented networks?
Because moving to a unified architecture requires agonizing internal political friction. You have to force different, often siloed departments to change their workflows.
And people hate change.
They despise it. Yeah. You have to force engineers to give up their favorite niche tools. You have to break down data fiefdoms and force teams to share telemetry. A weak leader avoids that political friction because it's exhausting.
But a sovereign leader?
A sovereign leader absorbs that pain to protect the enterprise. They force the unification because they understand the architectural risk.
And that leads to the final, perhaps most difficult cultural shift required of leadership. We have to talk about changing the underlying incentive structures of the organization.
We have to talk about the firefighter promotion culture.
Yes. In most corporate cultures, who gets the standing ovation at the quarterly all-hands meeting? Who gets the massive bonus? Who gets the promotion?
It's the engineer who stayed awake for 48 hours straight over a holiday weekend to heroically rebuild the SQL database after a massive ransomware attack.
They are the hero. They saved the company from total ruin.
They did save the company, and they deserve praise for the effort. But if you only reward the heroic recovery, if you only give bonuses for putting out massive fires, you are subconsciously incentivizing your workforce to quietly start fires, or at the very least, to ignore the smoldering embers until they become a blaze.
You are rewarding the chaos.
Exactly. Because if you quietly fix a vulnerability on a Tuesday afternoon, no one notices. There's no bonus for a non-event.
So what does a mature leader do? How do you change that psychology?
They learn to value, fund, and protect the silence.
The silence.
The quiet, boring, uneventful operation of a digital infrastructure isn't a lack of achievement. When the firewalls hold, when the tired developer feels safe enough to report the GitHub mistake early, when the UTM catches the anomaly in milliseconds and blocks the IP automatically, nothing happens.
The servers stay on.
The e-commerce checkout flows smoothly. The business functions normally. There are no sirens. There are no heroes staying up for 48 hours.
It's an entirely invisible victory.
It is a monumental victory of architectural planning, leadership clarity, and cultural discipline. Leaders must learn to celebrate the silence, to reward the preventative maintenance, because that silence is the sound of prevention working.
It is the sound of an organization that has mastered its own complexity.
Exactly.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We've moved far past the blinking lights and the vendor pitches to see that security is, ultimately, a deeply human endeavor.
It really is. It is about the courage to face friction, the clarity to demand responsibility rather than just compliance, and the sovereignty to retain your judgment in the face of algorithmic convenience.
It requires a fundamental, uncomfortable shift in how we view risk and our personal role in mitigating it.
Yes.
Which leaves you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. Tomorrow morning, I want you to open your laptop and look at your organization's digital front doors.
Take a really close look.
Look at your login screens, your API endpoints, your seamless customer checkout flows. But don't look at them as a CEO or a developer or a marketer. Look at them as an attacker.
See what the CC.
Is your brilliantly frictionless user experience actually just the beautifully paved high-speed highway for automated deception? And if it is, who in your organization currently has the courage to say so out loud?
That is the ultimate question of culture.
Security is not a control problem. It's a leadership decision.